Hi, everyone. So welcome to our session, Naming in DDD, or how you express your intention into your code. My name is Sepehr Namdar. So I am a technology-agnostic developer. That means that I'm interested in any subject that does not have a link to some particular technique like DDD, architecture, craft, and so on. I'm also a co-founder of DDD Iran, which is a community for Persian people. And currently, I'm working for Shodo as a software developer in Paris. So this talk, I was supposed to do that with Khaled Souf. He gets sick, and he can't be with us, unfortunately. So yeah, I will do that alone. Sorry about that. So who already knows this famous quote from Phil Carton? Very well. So actually, naming is easy. I can name that X, OK? But finding a name that expresses the intent beside that thing is hard, and very hard for us as developers. I can assure you invalidating cache is also too hard. So what is the naming? So in Oxford, it's specify a time or place as something desired, suggested, or decided on. But we will see that this is a little bit different for us as developers. So naming is something that is collaborative. We will not do that alone. Well, most of the time, names comes from the domain experts. But as developers, as team members, we can also find names when coding or when working together. These names that we found, we need to share that with our teammates. We need to validate them with our domain experts. And we need to put them somewhere, for example, in a kind of glossary, to maintain them. Naming is also conventions. So these are rules that we fix with our teammates. We need to gather all team together, put them in a room, talk about these conventions, and decide about them. Once set, we need to put them somewhere, for example, in a wiki, or as a linter, like the one of Airbnb or Google. The most important part is that naming is a powerful tool for us to communicate with each other. We communicate with our colleagues, with our developers through the code, also but by ourselves. Because we came back to that code that we wrote, and we need to understand what was the intent here. And all these collaborative modeling techniques and tools that we have in DDD can be really handy in finding names. For example, event storming is a real powerful tool that can help us to find names. So in our definition, naming is a process that helps us to understand some intent without having the need to going deep on details. So raise your hand if you find your right names at the first try. None of us. OK, good. So Arlo Shi, in his wonderful blog, talks about the 7 stages of naming. And in that blog, we can understand that naming is a process, is an iteration, OK? And at the 5th stage of the naming, we can start to having some name that is close to our domain. It's the same idea of conceptual contours. In conceptual contours of Supple Design in DDD, you need to iterate, to refactor, to remodel things, to find a good granularity, to find a good cohesion between your objects. a good granularity for your bounded context. And naming is exactly the same idea. It's a process that we need to repeat to find at last a name that is close to the intent of our domain. So let's do some exercise. If the intent of this project structure is clear for you, raise your hand. None of us. Okay. Why it's too hard to understand what is the intent here? The problem is that here we are focusing on technical terms. For example, controller, DAO, manager, helper, I don't know what. And anytime that we open one of these packages, what we can find? We will find many contexts mixing together. Person, purchase, marketing, manager, I don't know why, blah, blah, blah. Now, could you tell me what is the intent beside this project structure? So raise your hand if it's clear for you, the intent of, okay. Okay, many hands. Very well. Why this time it was easier? Here, by naming things, I can understand which are my use cases. What is the intent of my system? What is my system is supposed to do? Who are my actors? And all the technical stuff, I can put them somewhere, for example, in a package that name infrastructure. So now I can focus only on my domain, okay? The other thing is that here we have just one context, which is doing an interview for a human resource, okay? That helps me to understand the intent beside this project structure. Let's talk a little bit about building blocks. So how do you name your repositories? If it's the first suggestion, raise your hand. No one? Okay. Few of us. Raise your hand if it's the second one. No one. Okay. Raise your hand if it's the third suggestion. Okay. More hands. More hands. Very well. And how about the last one? Raise your hand. Okay. You're all right. All these suggestions are correct because naming depends on your team. You don't use them lonely. If in your team you decide to go for the aggregate name plus the repository, it's okay. You just accept that and respect this choice, okay? Even if you are not currently agree with that. In my team, we go for the third one. Why? Because a repository is a collection of data, okay? And it refers to an aggregate, which in this example is book. And so we add an S because it's a collection of books, okay? And what I should find when I open this class books, this interface, sorry, this abstraction actually, I should find some abstract methods, some abstract functions that reveal the intent of my interface. I should not have the need to go in the implementation to understand what was the intent of that method. That's what we name intention-revealing interfaces in Supple Design. So for the repository implementation, again, all these names could be correct, but with my team, we decided to name it with some prefix plus the repository name. By this naming, I can understand that when I open this class, I use Mongo as some database and I know which kind of code I'm supposed to see. Again, by this naming, I can create other implementations of my interface. And so, for example, for my tests, I can use fake books. So I can understand that in this class, I have fake data, so I can use them for my tests. An infrastructure service is like the repository. The difference is that you don't have a persistence. Okay, it could be having some data through HTTP, doing some mapper, okay? And this infrastructure is a part of my domain. So I go for the third suggestion, okay? Maybe the second one is not a good choice because I already named my repositories with an S. So I don't create this information. And the first one should be too specified, okay? An application service is somewhere that we can find the scenario of our use cases. Okay, so even if in the architecture it's not a part of my domain, the names that I choose is more domain terms. Why? Because the use case is something that is very important for my business, for my domain. Okay, so we go for plan interview. And this plan interview is expressed as a verb. I can understand when I go to this class, I'm supposed to see the scenario to how plan an interview. The first one is a kind of disinformation because we have many kind of services. For example, when we do DDD, so it's not really specified. And as I put all my use cases in some package that name action or use case, so it's redundant to add action and use case as suffix to the name of my domain, to the name of my application service. That doesn't, okay. Domain service is a kind of service that do something special in my domain. So again, we choose to go for a domain term, which is interview planifier. So I can understand that this service could help me to interview, to plan an interview. And again, the first suggestion could be a kind of this information. So let's see some bad practices about naming. We name that naming smells. So in some books like Clean Code, we are supposed to not use acronyms. We are not supposed to use names that are not pronounceable, and we are supposed to make them pronounceable. But what if this term, this acronym, which is not pronounceable, is a part of our domain, okay? This term has something specific, has some meaning, has some special meaning in our domain. Imagine in your code, instead of SPBB, you put strategic performance-based budgeting. When you talk with someone, instead of SPBB, you say strategic performance-based budgeting, okay? It's too hard. It takes too time. It's too long. If everyone knows what is SPBB, just go for SPBB. It's okay. You are not forced to make everything pronounceable, but you can do some comments, okay, to explain what is SPBB. So raise your hand. I love to make you some sport. Raise your hand if when you talk with your domain expert, you use technical terms. Really? You shouldn't. Because technical terms, a domain expert is not supposed to understand them, okay? And your code is also a model, okay? So as your diagrams, as your documents Your code also is supposed to be read by some people who are not technical. So the idea is to not using some technical terms when naming. I did this experience with some product owners. When I finish a feature, I ask my product owner to come sit with me. I ask him to read my code and tells me what he understands. Is this the need that he expressed to me? Is that right? If a non-technical person like a product owner can read and understand my code, so a technical member of my team will do. So imagine that as a human resource, you have some context which is sourcing. In this context, you are supposed to going on some social network and find candidates. Okay, so in this context, you look more about these skills or source of contact of that person. Okay, imagine you have a second context, which is interview. So in this context, you are more interested about these skills, the name, experiences, maybe the soft skills of your candidate. And imagine that you have a third context, which is contracting. It's when your candidate finished the process, and now we need to sign some contract. So here you are more interested about his name, his address, the social number, and the salary. And by this example, we can see that how a small candidate object could grow over the time and become a source of problem. Because if you have a bug in that candidate, it will impact many contexts, contracting, sourcing, and interview. So the idea in DDD is to keep them isolated in their bounded context, okay? Even if the candidate is the same person, we keep them isolated in their bounded context. And it's not a problem if we do some duplications. So maybe the name is duplicated in all three bounded contexts. It's not a problem. We accept that. So in sourcing bounded context, a candidate is someone that we found in some social network, and its CV matches to our criteria. In interview bounded context, the candidate is someone that is supposed to pass interview process. And in the third one, in contracting, a candidate is someone that already passed all these interview process and is suggested to sign a contract. Now, the question that I have for you is that candidate term is the right term for all these bounded contexts? So raise your hand if you agree with candidate term in sourcing bounded context. Okay? Raise your hand now if you are okay with the second suggestion. Okay, very well. And raise your hand if you think that candidate is a good term, is a right name for contracting bounded context. Okay, none of us. Well, in sourcing bounded context, it's not a candidate, it's a prospect. We didn't start the interview process, okay, yet. So it's not a candidate, a prospect. It's in the interview bounded context, it's the right term. It's really a candidate because we are having some process with that person. And in the contracting bounded context, it's not a candidate. It's already an employee. We want to sign a contract with him, okay? It's a part of our company now. So it's an employee, it's not a candidate. So in this example, we can see that how isolating things in their own bounded context can help us to find better names, okay? That's important. The last one, so imagine that you are working in a Latvian company, okay? And you have some term in your bounded context, in your ubiquitous language, which is clients, okay? And these clients, as you want to have a code that is fully English, you ask your developers to translate it. Imagine you have 3 developers. One developer go to Google Translate, took client, the second one took customer, and the third one patron. Could you imagine how your code will be bad, smelly? Because at this time, at this first time, you can't understand your code, okay? As anyone choose some different name. And so the idea is, it's not a problem if you have a mixed language program. You can mix French with English. You can mix Latvian with English, okay? And if you are forced to use English everywhere, it's not a problem. You can find some translation for your ubiquitous language terms and add some column, you know, in your glossary and tell your developers for this domain term, you should use that translation so you can give a code that is readable easily. So the final word is that even if in your conversations you respect all the domain terms, even if in your diagrams you use domain terms, in your documentation, if in your code you don't respect that, you miss all the values. Why? Because it's your code that will become a product, okay? So the truth is in your code. You should be able to write some code that fits your domain terms, domain names. And as Vaughan Vernon says in his famous book, Domain-Driven Design Distillate, it was really hard for me and Khaled to make this, to filtering a lot of information and make this talk for you. We would like to go deeper in details, but as we have a limited time, we couldn't. Maybe we will do another talk that took longer, and then we could be able to go more in details. So if you have any question, you can reach me and Khaled by Twitter, or after the talk, you can reach me. I will be happy to talk with you about names. I put some resources that you can find after. You have also the Blue Book, okay, which is a very good resource. And I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sepehr.
Thank you, Kenny.